This is Texas, one of the largest states in America. The 28 million people that live and work in Texas all rely on the state's infrastructure network. But most of this infrastructure is old and unreliable, causing its residents to face problems every day. But the most immediate problem is the state's power supply infrastructure. The Texas electrical grid is old and outdated, and has been unable to meet the demands of the growing population and economy. This has led to widespread blackouts, most notably in February of 2021, when more than 4 million residents lost electricity. But more than a year after this catastrophic event occurred, the Texas power grid has still not been fixed. But all of this raises the question, why does Texas have failing power supply infrastructure, and what's preventing the state from solving the problem? To answer this, we first need to understand what caused the power grid to fail. The Electric Reliability Council of Texas is the electric grid operator for most of the state. In February of 2021, a rare and prolonged winter weather event in the state caused widespread power outages and disruptions to the electrical grid. More than 4 million customers were without power at the peak of the crisis, leaving millions in the cold temperatures. Officials have determined that the outages were caused by a combination of factors, including freezing temperatures, high demand for electricity, and limited power generation from natural gas, wind, and solar power plants. But the real cause of the power crisis is more complex than many would first believe, and there are many reasons behind this. For one, Texas runs its own power grid throughout the state, separate from the rest of the United States. While the majority of states in America are split between two separate electrical grids, the Texas power grid is separate because it is its own entity. The Texas grid is not connected to the two major grids, which are managed by the Eastern Interconnection and the Western Interconnection. The state's independent grid was established in the 1970s, after a severe statewide power crisis. As a result of this event, the government formed the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and it was created with an intent to regulate the interstate transmission of electricity. While this was a federal agency, Texas chose to create their own state agency referred to as the Public Utility Commission of Texas. The Texas legislature also created ERCOT, which stands for the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, to address the concerns that led to the nationwide power outages in the 1970s and improve the state's electricity infrastructure. Today, ERCOT manages the flow of electric power to more than 24 million Texas customers, representing about 90% of the state's electricity needs. Being on its own power grid, Texas has a large capacity for generating electricity. More than 85% of the state's power comes from natural gas, coal, and nuclear power. Renewable energy sources such as wind and solar power only make up a small percentage. Since the state is on a separate power grid, it is not subject to mandatory federal energy regulations, which is why it has not joined back to the Western Interconnection grid. Additionally, Texas has its own unique set of challenges when it comes to power generation and delivery, which require different approaches and solutions than those used in other parts of the country. For example, Texas has a higher peak demand for electricity due to hot summer weather, which can lead to higher electricity prices at different times throughout the year. While the state has had strong advantages by possessing its own power grid, the disadvantages of the statewide system led to severe problems during the power crisis in February of 2021. During this period, it was difficult to get assistance from other states since the power grids are not interconnected. This was one of the main problems which caused the outage to be prolonged for such a long period of time. This is because the grid does not have any direct connection to other local grids, which run on their own network, meaning that power cannot flow from one grid to another. And this isolation is intentional, as it prevents disruptions in one part of the grid from affecting the entire system. ERCOT itself cannot manage or transfer electricity to any other power distribution network or organization. The limited connections that the Texas grid has is to the Eastern Power Grid and the Power Grid in Mexico. In other words, Texas and its power grid is completely isolated from the rest of the United States, which turned out to be a catastrophic problem when the state's power grid failed to distribute power. But more than a year later, the Texas power grid has still not been fixed, raising many questions as to how an event like this can be prevented in the future. There are many complex reasons why the Texas power grid has not been fixed and who is responsible for maintaining the power grid. We have to keep in mind that the Texas power grid is one of the largest and most complex electrical grids in the world, and slight changes can result in major problems for the entire state. The primary reasoning behind the grid not being fixed is because the Electric Reliability Council of Texas has not made significant changes to its grid operations since the statewide power blackout in February of 2011. In fact, ERCOT has only made minor modifications to its procedures since this event that occurred more than 10 years ago. Because of this, the company has faced public backlash as to why they had not addressed these problems in the past. The agency has also been slow to adopt new technologies and has not made necessary changes to its grid after multiple power outages since the formation of the company in the 1970s. As a result, the Texas power grid remains vulnerable to extreme weather events, since none of the recommended changes have been put in place. We also have to note that ERCOT is a non-profit organization that is overseen by the Texas legislature. This means that the company is not subject to the same level of scrutiny as for-profit utility companies that run the rest of the power distribution across the United States. But besides ERCOT, the Texas legislature did pass multiple different bills setting new standards for the Texas grid. One of the most notable being new weatherization standards, mainly towards electricity plants, to prevent severe damage in severe weather events. State lawmakers have also approved a plan for power and gas companies to raise rates in the state to help pay for the repairs that need to be done to the plants. Although this bill would help solve some of the grid's problems, the high cost to the taxpayers may not be well accepted throughout the state. According to estimates, the grid is in need of billions of dollars in repairs, which will not be easy to achieve without raising the cost of electricity in the state. Besides the bills that were passed, many state officials have also blamed the physical design of these power plants for the blackouts they caused within the past few decades. Some experts have suggested that the grid may need to be completely rebuilt. The problem with this plan is that it would be costly and a time-consuming process. As of now, there is no clear way to rebuild the grid without overburdening ratepayers in the state with the costs of the changes. Given all these factors, it's understandable why the Texas grid has not been fixed. However, it is still unclear how long it will be until a solution to the problem can be found. Today, the Texas power grid has not seen any significant changes made since the events unfolded more than a year ago. The state has not been able to invest into new power plants or make significant upgrades to the grid, while the population and economy continue to grow at the same time. This has led to higher demand for electricity and higher prices. The state continues to rely on old, insufficient power plants with nothing planned ahead to solve the problem. In the wake of the power crisis, a number of investigations have been launched in order to determine what went wrong and how to prevent such a situation from happening again in the near future. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe if you enjoyed the video.